Most campers build their fire the same way, and most campfires fail for the same reasons. The butane lighter that quits when the temperature drops. The commercial fire starter that burns out before the wood catches. The fire lay that looks correct on video and collapses in the first real wind. Tonight we expose 7 fire setup mistakes that are quietly ruining campfires across every skill level, including one that experienced campers have been teaching confidently for decades. Then we cover 3 approaches that hold up when conditions turn against you. One of them will change how you build fire. I'm Ranger Jack. 20 years as a park ranger and outfitter in the Rockies. No brand deals, no sponsored products, no free gear. What I have is a field notebook. Let's start with the mistake almost every camp makes on night 1. Number 7, the butane lighter as your only ignition source. I want to start here because I lived this one. Cold October, high elevation in the Rockies, a family group that had done everything else reasonably well. Food, shelter, and 3 butane lighters between 6 people. When the temperature dropped that evening, every lighter failed. Not because they were defective, because butane behaves differently in cold air. The fuel contracts, vapor pressure drops. Below roughly 50 degrees Fahrenheit, performance starts degrading noticeably. At or near freezing, many standard lighters stop producing a usable flame entirely. You click and get almost nothing. Here is the problem. Most campers carry 1 lighter and consider the fire kit complete. A lighter is not a fire kit. It is the last step in a fire kit. The ignition source is the final action in a sequence that has to be built before you need it. Everything before it, the tinder, the kindling, the lay, the sight, is what actually produces the fire. A lighter that fails at 30 degrees does not care how well you constructed the lay around it. For warm weather car camping in calm, dry conditions, 1 lighter is fine. You will probably never notice the limitation. But if you are above 9,000 feet in October, camping in early spring or dealing with cold rain, a single butane lighter is 1 cold morning away from leaving you without options. A lighter is not a fire kit. It is the last step in a fire kit. Most campers never build the other steps. That one is fixable with a single addition to your pack. The next mistake costs money and still fails in the wind. Number 6, commercial fire starters, wax cubes, all-weather discs, instant fire blocks. You have seen them stacked next to bundled firewood at outdoor retailers. The packaging uses words like all-weather, wind-resistant, and guaranteed ignition. People buy them because the promise is exactly what they want, a reliable bridge between a lighter and a burning fire. Here is what those products actually do. They provide a controlled burn window of roughly 3 to 8 minutes. That window is enough to ignite very dry, very fine, correctly arranged kindling in a sheltered position. If the kindling is slightly damp, slightly too thick, loosely arranged, or exposed to wind, the burn window closes before heat transfer completes. The starter did its job. The fire did not start. The false confidence is the real problem. A camper uses 1 starter, nothing catches. They try a second, still nothing. A third. Now they're all gone. And the camper is standing in front of cold wood, wondering what went wrong with the product, when the product was never the issue. It burned for exactly as long as advertised. The setup surrounding it was not ready. A commercial fire starter is not a substitute for a tinder system. It is a supplement to one. At a sheltered site with pre-split dry wood in moderate conditions, it can work well. In wind, with field-gathered wood, you are burning a $3 item to accomplish nothing. The starter lit. The fire didn't. The product did exactly what it said. The setup around it didn't. And the packaging won't warn you about that. Wood is next. And most campers are making this mistake before they have struck a single match. Number 5, grabbing the nearest available wood without evaluating it. This one feels so obvious that it never gets taught. Wood is right there. You can see it. You pick it up and put it in the lay. The process feels settled before anyone thinks about it. The problem is that most wood on the ground in a backcountry environment is wetter than it looks. Wood in contact with soil absorbs moisture from below. Wood that got rained on 3 days ago looks dry on the surface and holds moisture through most of its interior. Punky, partially rotted wood will smolder and never produce a sustained flame. Green or recently dead wood will not combust efficiently at the temperatures a small kindling fire can generate. None of this is visually obvious. The wood looks like wood. Campers build the lay correctly and then spend 30 minutes wondering why there is smoke and no flame. They change techniques. They burn through their starters. The issue was the fuel before the first match was ever struck. In dry summer conditions, with good natural deadfall and strong sun exposure, nearby wood can work fine. The failure becomes predictable after recent rain, in early spring, in dense forest with minimal sun penetration, or at altitude where wood dries slowly. A quick field test. Snap a small branch. Wood with significant interior moisture will bend before it breaks. Dry, burnable wood snaps cleanly. Dry on the outside is not dry on the inside. Most campfire wood on the ground is wetter than it looks and denser than it burns. The next mistake looks the most confident because the person making it is clearly doing something. Number 4, starting with too much fuel too fast. Watch anyone who learned fire building from watching someone else. They pile on the larger logs early. It signals commitment. It looks like confidence. In outdoor videos with pre-split bone-dry wood shot on a calm backyard afternoon, it can even work. In field conditions, it is one of the more reliable ways to kill a fire before it establishes. Fire in the building stage needs oxygen as much as fuel. Large, dense wood placed before a solid tinder to kindling transfer completes does two things simultaneously. It eliminates airflow the early flame requires, and the thermal mass of the logs absorbs heat rather than reflecting it back, dropping temperature at exactly the moment the fire needs to rise. The pattern is consistent. Initial flame appears. Larger fuel goes on, the flame collapses, tinder consumed, kindling warmed but not ignited. Nothing left to restart with. This mistake then drives people toward more commercial tinder, more fire starters, more products. To solve what is entirely a sequencing problem, you cannot buy your way past the sequence. Build the tinder layer completely. Let the kindling layer fully establish. Add medium fuel once those are burning reliably. Then move up. No shortcuts in the order. A big fire needs a small fire first. Every time, without exception. The next mistake looks like careful preparation because it uses a technique most people have seen demonstrated correctly. Number 3, the log cabin, lay without a sufficient tinder base. I want to be precise here because the log cabin is a legitimate fire lay. The structure creates correct airflow geometry. The framing around the interior allows heat to build and circulate. When demonstrated with quality tinder in good conditions, it works cleanly. The problem is that most people build the structure before they have built an adequate tinder foundation. I had a client group in the Wind River Range on a winter trip. Exposed site, temperatures falling, and one client whose hands were already too cold to manage a lighter effectively by the time we reached the fire location. 2 log cabin attempts, tinder burned out both times before the surrounding kindling reached combustion temperature. The structure was correct. The tinder volume was insufficient for those conditions, and the wind exposure was working against us. We relocated, rebuilt with a deeper tinder base, and had fire on the next attempt. That is the failure pattern. The log cabin requires a deep, hot, dry tinder base to sustain heat transfer into the surrounding kindling long enough for combustion to establish. Most campers underestimate how much tinder that gap actually requires. In the field, tinder is a finite resource. When you burn through it on 2 failed attempts, you may have nothing left for a third. The structure was correct. The foundation wasn't. Fire lay is not architecture. It's heat management. Site is next, and this is the mistake that makes every other mistake worse. Number 2, ignoring fire site. Selection before building. The fire ring is there. That is where the fire goes. Most campers never examine whether the site makes sense for the conditions they are actually in. The designated pit marks the location, and the location feels decided before the first log goes down. Here's what sight does to everything else. Wind pulls heat away from the tinder layer before ignition can propagate through the lay. Ground moisture wicks thermal energy from the fire base before the kindling can sustain temperature. An exposed position means any early flame is disrupted before the kindling layer catches. You can have dry wood, quality tinder, a correctly built lay, and functional ignition, and wind will defeat you at the tinder stage if the sight is working against every other variable. I have it logged directly. A fire built at an exposed alpine site in light wind took over 60 minutes to establish. Same lay, same wood, same tinder, built the next morning in a naturally sheltered position behind a boulder. Under 10 minutes. The fire did not know the difference in skill between those two builds. The difference was entirely in the position. Established fire rings at managed campsites are generally usable. That placement decision has usually been made before you arrived. The problem escalates in dispersed camping, where you are choosing the location yourself. 2 minutes of site evaluation before the first log goes down changes the entire outcome. Most people never take those 2 minutes because site selection is almost never taught as a primary fire skill. You can do everything else correctly and still fail to build a fire. Wind does not care about your technique. And now the biggest one, the fire knowledge that most campers have been carrying since childhood and teaching other people as correct. Number 1. The teepee fire lay as the universal default. This is the one to sit with. You probably learned it from someone who genuinely knew what they were doing. The teepee appears in beginner fire guides. It is standard in scouting programs. It is passed down by experienced campers who built it successfully and then passed that success forward as universal technique, with complete confidence and complete authority. Here is what the teepee is actually optimized for. Upward draft, calm, sheltered conditions, a fire starting in still air where heat rises cleanly through the cone and ignites each surrounding layer in sequence. In those conditions, it is a valid lay. The fire record has entries where it worked correctly, and those entries share exactly one thing: little wind, quality tinder, sheltered position. Here is what even light wind does to a teepee. The cone structure exposes the tinder center to horizontal airflow. That disruption hits the ignition point before heat can establish and transfer outward into the kindling layer. The tinder burns. The flame is disrupted before the surrounding kindling reaches temperature, and the cone, which depends on leaning inward against itself, collapses quickly. When it collapses before combustion establishes, it smothers the fire rather than feeding it. Back to that same cold October trip, the night the butane lighters failed. 2 teepee attempts in what was only a light wind, both failed. Third attempt, different lay, tinder sheltered from the horizontal airflow, same wood, same starting material, fire, not because the group executed poorly. The teepee was wrong for those conditions, and no one had told them that a different condition requires a different lay, because the technique is taught as if condition does not matter. The danger of the teepee as a universal default is not that it fails dramatically. It is that it fails after you have followed every instruction correctly. You did exactly what you were taught. You blame your own execution, and you try again with the same approach in the same wind. The technique that every experienced camper taught you was right for the demonstration they showed you in. It's wrong for the conditions you will actually face. Those are the 7 traps. Here's what actually works when conditions are not cooperating. The lean-to fire lay is the first thing I reach for in variable or exposed conditions, and it is now the first lay I teach clients before anything else. Instead of building a cone that exposes the tinder center to horizontal wind, you build the fire against a natural windbreak, a large log, a rock face, a snow wall in winter, and lean kindling against it with the tinder sheltered in the protected pocket behind the wind. Heat is directed back into the tinder rather than rising and dispersing into the air around it. The structure does not collapse inward under wind pressure the way a teepee does. You can adjust and rebuild without consuming your tinder supply. In exposed alpine and subalpine positions, where the teepee fails predictably, The field record consistently shows better results with this approach. It does not look as impressive in a demonstration. It performs when demonstrations do not apply. For tinder, the most practical upgrade most campers can make is replacing commercial wax starters with fat wood or birch bark. Fat wood is the resin-saturated heartwood from dead pine stumps, available as processed sticks at outdoor retailers, and identifiable in the field from the dense, dark, resinous core at the center of old pine stumps. It smells sharp and breaks hard. Birch bark contains natural oils that produce sustained hot ignition even when surface moisture is present. Both materials light with less flame than a wax starter requires, and sustain combustion through wind conditions that would shut down a commercial product's geometry entirely. Neither requires a calm environment to function. I carry no brand affiliations and have no financial stake in what you purchase. But when field material consistently outperforms a packaged product across entries in the notebook, that is what the notebook shows. These materials have been keeping people warm in the field far longer than anything in the outdoor retailer checkout aisle. The third piece is a ferro rod paired with prepared natural tinder, carried as backup to your primary ignition. A ferro rod has no vapor pressure issue. It functions in cold, wet, and high-altitude conditions where butane fails. The key is the pairing. The rod is the reliable component, but the tinder preparation is the skill. To use one effectively, you have to prepare your tinder before you reach the fire site. You cannot plan to gather it on arrival. The moment you commit to a ferro rod as a backup system, you commit to tinder preparation as a pre-trip habit. And that habit, preparing the tinder layer completely before anything else, prevents most of the 7 failures on this list before a single match is ever struck. Before your next trip, run through this quickly. Do you have at least 2 independent ignition sources? Has your backup been cold tested before you actually needed it in the field? Is your tinder system prepared and stored dry, or are you planning to gather it when you get there? Are you using commercial fire starters as a substitute for a tinder system or as a supplement to one? Do you know what fire lay performs in variable wind, not just in a calm backyard demonstration? Can you identify wet, green, or punky wood in the field before it becomes your only option? At the site, evaluate wind exposure and ground moisture before the first match. Start with the smallest possible fire and add fuel only as each layer fully establishes. Know the failure mode of your preferred lay in wind. Check whether your tinder layer is deep enough and dry enough to sustain heat transfer into the kindling before you light it. None of that is complicated. All of it changes the outcome. Outdoor conditions do not respond to technique reputation or brand recognition. They respond to what you are doing right now in the air temperature and wind direction you have, with the fuel and tinder in front of you. That is what the notebook is for, replacing assumptions with what actually happened, entry by entry, trip by trip. Drop in the comments. What fire lay were you first taught, and where did you learn it? If a fire has ever failed you in the field, tell me the condition: cold, wind, wet wood, wrong site. Those are exactly the entries that go into the record. And if there is a scenario you want tested next, wet wood recovery, single match at altitude, no commercial tinder, put it in. That is where the next field entry comes from.